Cadillac Brembo ATS Caliper is installed. Look at that. We have clearance.
Hey, do you mean torch? Because I'm tired of seeing you use a freaking cigarette lighter to burn wires.
What's up, guys, and welcome back to the infamous project. We're finally gonna get an update on the twin turbo Coyote notchback that's sitting here behind me. And my apologies, like, this project has been pretty underrated and just flying underneath the radar, mostly because, well, it hasn't been a consistent project. It's been one of those that I plug away on here and there when I have extra time. And while the time has come to hopefully finish the home stretch, we're gonna run from third to home base. We're gonna knock this project out and finish up some of the last remaining items. So I don't think we're gonna be finishing the project in this episode, but I promise you that whatever's coming next won't be too far behind. The last that we had on this car was finishing up the detailing of the underside, where cleaned up the floor pans, unbolted all the loose miscellaneous stuff, and got that floorboard painted up. Since then, it's been working on things like suspension and brakes, converting things over. So as you can see, I've left some work here to do on the driver's side wheel well, and that's going to be bolting up the Brembo Cadillac ATS calipers, which I've already gone ahead. I've done the S&S sleeves. I've got all of the hardware and pads and all of that stuff based on all of those other how-to videos out there on YouTube. And I don't need to, beat a dead horse or whatever it is, because there's tons of information. The one thing that I'm going to add to this swap of putting these calipers on the front is your brake bias. Guys, if you're gonna put those calipers in the front, make sure you do the supporting mod in the rear. So I've already gone ahead and bolted on the Taurus rear calipers just to make sure that everything fits and does what it's supposed to. Now, I do have brand new rotors for the rear, so I still need to pull this off. This was just for mock-up and proof of concept to make sure everything was gonna work. I still need to go ahead and do the shocks, the springs. Got quad shock brackets in here. Yes, I'm hoping to get quad shocks on the car if I can, and just add to the overall drivability slash rideability of the car. So I've already gone ahead and bolted up the passenger side here, but I'll go into some older footage showing you guys what I did to get those Brembos prepared for the car. And you know what? I might actually have some other random footage of little tidbits for this car. So let's see what I've got, and then we'll circle back here and we'll knock out this driver's side caliper install and a couple other things while we're in there. All right, guys, working on these Cadillac Brembo calipers, $135 a piece, new on Amazon. Get yours today. And well, it's time to say bye to this Cadillac logo. Here we go. These are pretty much prepped up for paint. Gonna have to take these home. Gonna press out these inserts for the ones that we got in here from, forget the name again, S&S Engineering. So that way we have the right offset to be able to bolt these to our SN95 spindles. And from there, everything will be pretty much ready to go. So I'll pop these out, I'll get everything painted, press the new ones in, or maybe I'll pop them out, press the new ones in, just mask them off so that way I don't chip any paint. Trying to put the new ones in there, and we'll be pretty much good to go.
If you clearance this section here, what you're going to do is end up grinding into your threads, which you don't want to do. So I actually had to bring these back out a little bit. Wanting to do here is align these top lines to the edge of your caliper. Up here, you got a perfect straight line right there for your brake pads. And then when that's aligned, you should have a perfect Once you've got these things tapped into place, now is the hard part. Now what we're going to have to do is actually alter the caliper. Now let me show you why.
So now we're back and it's time to swap out the old for the new, right? So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna pull the old caliper off. We're gonna drill off the dust shields or grind off the rivets. These are just dust and dirt collectors in my opinion, and these ones are all folded and bent and everything else. So we're gonna take those off. I took out the factory carpet / sound deadening that was up in here, and I'm gonna put a piece of kill mat in there. And this will act really well in terms of lightweight, durability. Dirt isn't gonna stick to this like it does in the material or the fabric-y piece that's here from factory. So we'll get that installed in. And you can see the power steering pump still sitting here. So if you guys aren't familiar, 2 horns, you know, your honk honk actually sit right here on this bracket, which is pretty flimsy. And I'm thinking hopefully I can get the power steering pump bolted up in this general vicinity, and it'll be tucked up out of the way. The lines will be on the driver's side to get over to the rack up over in here, which you can see there's lots of stuff in the way here, but we can make it happen. So if we can get it tucked up here, and then I'm just gonna have to find a spot wherever I can get the reservoir bottle tucked up out of the way so we can actually add fluid as required. All right guys, so here's the former bracket for, we've successfully got our electric power steering up here, and I've just got 2 bolts on the factory bracket that was with this up in the inner fender on the top side, just kind of holding it in place. The bracket on the back side here can go, that's not gonna be able to bolt to anything. What I'm probably gonna do is do a custom plate off the back side of the frame rail. Then we'll do something integrated into this. And that way we just want to make sure that this thing is super secure, because it had a lot of bracketry holding it on, and rightfully so. It's a heavy unit, and well, it's pumping a bunch of fluid. And we've got the wrong sides. Classic issue. I don't know if it's people's poor recommendations on part numbers or if companies are genuinely just messing this up, but here is the factory threads and here's the threads for the brake line. Now, funny enough, this fit, or this was right on the other side, and this is the second set of lines, stainless lines, 2 different companies too, and one size is bigger, one size is smaller. So I've got fittings here at the shop that I'm just gonna, I cut that end of the brake line off. Here's the old fitting. So I'm gonna flare the end with the right fitting on there, and that should fix our problem. I'm gonna have to do the same thing to Jerry's notch. I actually read someone on a Facebook group that had the same issue. He's like, I had to order 3 different sets of lines just to be able to have one set that worked. So we are gonna get this sorted out. So we got our end flared there, looks pretty nice. I'm happy with my work, so hopefully I'll be able to get creative. There is some slack here in the line just because of the way that the tubular K-member is, so hopefully I'll be able to make this work. Look at this, managed to sneak it up in the factory location there. Don't forget the spacer plate. This is part of the SMS kit. That'll make sure that the rotor is bumped out just enough so that we get equal pad distribution between both sides of the rotor. Brand new rotor from Detroit Axle. You'll notice there's a sticker that says front driver side. The other one says front passenger side. And that is to make sure that the slotted slots are facing the correct direction for cooling. So now we got that on. It's time to make sure that our inserts and everything works on our ATS caliper. Cadillac Brembo ATS caliper is installed. We'll wipe it down. Got that braided flex line installed. Had to do a custom fitting and flaring of the brake line, new rotor, but other than that, everything is good to go. So one other thing, guys, that you might have remembered about this car was the transmission and the fact that the front plate on it was, well, in pieces, for lack of a better way of putting it. And we had to remove it, and Hanlon Motorsports hooked me up with a new front plate. We got that swapped over and the transmission back installed. So I got some footage on that. I'm gonna play that now for you so you guys can see what we found and some of the reassembly process. Guys, so thanks to Ricky's help, managed to jam this T56 back into the car pretty easily. Everything's bolted up. The one thing that we noticed when we were pulling out the cross member to drop the transmission down was that one of the bolts that go through the sleeve here on the side was actually broken, and it was halfway like through the nut. It was a really odd spot to be broken. Now, whether somebody put it on that way or it happened after the fact, who knows? Because at the end of the day, the front plate off of the transmission was cracked, the throw bearing was cracked, you know, a lot of stuff that leads to maybe a couple pretty aggressive launches on the car. So maybe it snapped the bolt. So it's kind of an opportunity to check out the Stiffler's cross member. So this guy's sleeved for the factory thickness of a bolt. And Ricky's like, man, I think I got some sleeves off some of the Can-Am parts. And he has some crazy stuff sitting next door in terms of side-by-sides. So it's like, why don't we put a sleeve that has a bigger opening so we can run a bigger bolt through there? So you can see the difference in the bolt hole size. This thickness is the same thickness that goes through the bushing. So we're gonna end up swapping these sleeves out for these guys, and we're gonna be able to upgrade the hardware to 10.9s. And well, hopefully it'll be sturdy enough for the launches or anything that'll happen in the future in terms of the power of this car. So we're gonna go ahead now and pound these guys out, put the new sleeves on, we'll get all the spacers and everything else mocked up, and we'll get this Stiffler's transmission cross member reinstalled. Our Stiffler's mount is in place, bolted up, stronger hardware, and now is time to connect the bottom side of this car. So I've got a set of Stiffler subframes right there. In fact, I've got two sets. I got another set of Stiffler subframes sitting right over there. So all kinds of Stiffler stuff hanging around here. First things first is we need to put these bolts where the rear seat bolts would be, so that way we have some threads hanging at the bottom, which gives us some material here. So that's part of actually the installation procedure. Is we'll get these bolted up, and that should hold the either end of the connector near the frame rail and get us in a pretty good position to be able to weld these in place. All right, guys, car's back up in the air. You can see where the bolts came through for the rear seat bolts here. So the only thing to keep in mind right now is that where I have the stands here for the hoist is probably going to be in the way. So we're going to have to get creative, which is fine. We're going to be using jack posts because ultimately what we want to do is we want to get the car on the weight of the suspension, and that will allow us to make sure that everything is square, everything is right. Now, in order to do that, I need to get the rear springs in here and the rear shock still. So I'm going to be focusing on getting that done. I need to get the old coilover bracket out of the top that can allow me to put these Belltech drop shocks in. And then I've already got the rear springs that are going to be going in the car down in the bottom there. Lowered the car down and pulled out the top coilover Viking mounts. And you can see by the size of that thread, that's a lot thicker than your top mount for a factory shock. What that means is they drilled this hole out. So this hole is now bigger, which means, you know, we have to take that into consideration. I had standard bushings here like this that a lot of people use. Now, these aren't as wide as the factory ones, but you know, they do in a stock application and they fit over. You can see the difference in thickness between these two mounting points. So my concern is, you know, even though I know that technically speaking, these ones would probably work, you know, there's still some surface area there, but you just don't need over time that potentially wanting to start pulling through the hole. So I went over next door, and this is where you guys got to get creative. Ricky's working on a Dodge 2500, and he's literally in the middle of swapping shocks. And if we look at these rubbers are actually not in bad shape. Things are dirty, but things are in perfectly good shape. We got huge surface area here if we want it. The only problem is, you know, these holes are a little bit bigger and we don't want this wobbling around. Now, tightening everything down nice and tight, there's probably not too much to worry about. However, I have an idea. This is kind of the fun part. It can be the frustrating part of builds, right? Frustrating part being that, you know, you were hoping to get something done right away and you had a plan and your plan's not going according to plan. So then sometimes it gets frustrating, but it's an opportunity to make it right and come up with a solution. And then when you've got that figured out in the end and everything is done, you're victorious and you're almost happy that it happened. Sometimes you just stick with the whole, it was a pain in the ass. But going back to my idea, if we go over here, oh shit, these don't have them. I don't know if you guys are maybe thinking what I'm thinking here, but the sleeves for the end links, usually there's sleeves in here. I feel like those sleeves could be a perfect fit. Question is, do I have sleeves? Look at this guy. What'd you bring me?
Some nuggets. You want some nuggets?
Ooh.
Here's your favorite
kind. Are they Dorman?
Your favorite kind.
Yes. Is that for your car?
That's for this car, yeah.
Oh, more work for me. Okay. Is that the plug for the generator?
Plug for the generator.
Nice.
There's a cover.
Won't be without in the nice storm again.
Cover for the generator for when it's not icing.
Sweet.
Cloth tape, because I know you like cloth tape. That's kind of like a stuff.
Ooh, yeah. Actually, I got wire loom here today to work on.
A little bit of butane, and finally a butane torch, because I'm tired of seeing you use a freaking cigarette lighter to burn wires.
Not burning wires. I'm
man.
shrinking heat shrink. So this next day here, it's cooled off. So I'm dressed a little bit warmer, and I want to get these rear shocks and springs and everything else installed. So if you remember yesterday, we were talking about getting innovative and coming up with a solution which involved these Dodge shock rubber isolators. Now, the one thing is the hole is bigger in diameter on the inside, which, take a look here, there was a lot of play. So I went to TSC, I was trying to find a sleeve that would fit, and there was nothing that was 100% the right size. So I thought to myself, well, what else could I use? And well, here is what's left of a sleeve from a Foxbody front sway bar end link. And you can see it pretty much lines up where the threads stop, which is good, because what you don't want is you don't want it in a way where it's so high that the spacer is actually going to keep it from pulling the bushing down. So what we got here is this, and you can see it sticks up a little bit, which is fine, because by the time we start tightening this down, it's going to compress everything, and then the bushing ultimately will come up into this rubber a little bit. And then from there, we get our top washer and our nut, and everything should be good to go. Sort of show you guys, you can see, there we go. So when the bushing will fit right up in that hole and hold itself like that, we know we're in good shape. All right, I got sidetracked there. Need to put in the new painted up latch and rewrap this harness. I'll have to get a little Christmas tree on there, but that looks a million times better. All right, guys, so I'm impressed with these drop shocks because these are Eibach, not Sport Lines, the other ones, whatever they're called. They're a fairly stiff spring, and these guys have some material missing. As you can see, they're nowhere near as tall as a factory spring. And like, that is a tight fit in there. And what's holding the rear up right now essentially are these drop shocks. So what this is telling me is that these are significantly shorter over stock in terms of their travel, because everything, the weight is off. So they're overextended right now. And ultimately this is what's holding the diff up as high as it is right now, which is pretty cool. It's really what we want, because it means that once the weight and everything of the car is on here, it means that there's going to be some good travel for the suspension, and it's going to keep the spring in place, because this is pretty much the bottoming out of the reverse way. So sometimes if you don't have enough spring material, Brutal can tell you about this, or if you corner too much and maybe this side comes up, what's going to happen is, you know, the body is going to come up and then take pressure off the spring. You don't have enough, the spring could be liable to fall out of its seat. So we're in pretty good shape here. The shocks are going to keep things in place. I've talked about a lot of things of concern when you go really low. So these shocks are doing exactly what they need to do. So now I'm going to get a jack post underneath here, actually jack things up so I can unbolt the shock, get the spring in, and everything should be good to go. So we've got our spring positioned exactly where I want it. This guy's facing inwards, got good sized loop around that mount. We're on this perch. Our shock is in place, and we're almost in position where we can put enough weight on the underside. We can torque down all of our control arm bolts and get those all sorted out. But now let's talk about quad shocks real quick. Now, a lot of you guys are probably like, man, quad shocks, really? This is a race car. Well, this is a race car that's going to be low to the ground, and we want it to ride well, and we want to keep the rear stabilized. So I am trying to get away with getting quad shocks put in here, and they don't need to be fancy. Number one, let me just stress that right now. And you guys, you can go Bilstein if you want. A lot of people think that these are the slimmest and the best. Well, they're pricey. They work well, yes, absolutely. But something is better than nothing is probably the best way to describe what we're after here. And if you look down on the table, which is ultra messy, is a set of Gabriel, which I think LMR sells them. I'm sure you can get them from the local parts store. And this one actually doesn't have, I've already pulled the boot off. And it's funny, they put these boots on and paint everything together. As you can see, the paint flakes right off. They paint the shaft and everything. So I found that that was a little funny. But the reason why I've pulled this boot off is that we're trying to get as much clearance as possible. So this thickness with the band that's around it adds for some material that gets in the way. But the important thing that I want to show you guys here, this housing is actually a little bit shorter. And some of you might be like, oh, what's the big deal? That's maybe 1/2 inch at best. Well, I'm about to show you the difference because it is really important when we're talking about wheel to quad shock clearance. So here we go. So remember that boot that I was talking about that was right here that I took off? Well, let's see if it's enough. Okay, I put 2 lug nuts on just to have a closer look here. And would you look at that? We have clearance. Now, one important thing to remember that 1/2 inch of difference that I showed you on the Bilstein versus this Gabriel? Well, I bet you that Bilstein would be liable to hit the inside of the wheel. Now, the other thing too is, a lot of you guys run 17s or 18s. This is a 19-inch wheel. So we are actually in luck because, well, the inside diameter here is larger, giving us just that little bit of clearance that we need. Amazingly enough, I can get 2 fingers up in here. So not too bad, just barely fits. We're gonna get away with it, which is awesome. Why not run your quads if you can? I know some of you guys are gonna ask because this is actually pretty impressive. You gotta remember, this is an SN95 diff in this car, which means that we got 3/4 of an inch more poke over stock factory Fox track width. Now, so we've got that 3/4 of an inch that we have to factor in. Got a 19 by 10 inch wheel in the back, running a 275/30/19. Let me just make sure. Yes, 275/30/19. So you're probably wondering the offset. The offset on this guy is 13 millimeter. I will double check that, but I believe that that's what it is. And what's amazing about it, we didn't have to do any rolling or cutting up here. We didn't have to do any hammering or beating on the inside in here. Are we close? Yeah, we're close, but we're not too bad. In reality, if we rolled these fenders, we could probably go up to 285 and still be able to run that quad shock. In fact, maybe even squeeze a 295, depending what the tire manufacturer is in there, but just goes to show what you can achieve with the right width, size, and offset wheels on your Fox. So with the exception of the quad shocks, because I wanted to get that section painted that was underneath those boots that I cut off, everything is installed, torqued down, tightened up, had the weight of the suspension with a jack post underneath the car when we tightened everything up, and went pretty straightforward. So no issues there. Now you can see I've got 4 posts underneath the car, all underneath points that can take the load of the car as it were sitting on the ground. So this is really important when we're doing the subframe connectors because we want to make sure that the car is true and that it's straight and that it's not, you know, welded crooked, because now is the time to make sure that the body is where it should be naturally. And you might have a shop that has unevenly poured floors. That is very common. So what you're going to want to do is just make sure that you measure, make sure that you look at all your gaps and your fitment. Try opening the door and closing it, and it should be smooth and 100%. It shouldn't be jacked up, it shouldn't be harder to close or dragging on the striker or any of those things. Just try and get your car as level and as true as possible, as if it were sitting on its suspension on level ground. That's the key. In fact, in some cases, maybe your car has a little bit of tweak from a previous accident or something, and weld your subframes up to accommodate for maybe a little bit of twisty. That's a whole other conversation. So you can see I've got the posts underneath the control arms in the front here, and not all of the weight is off the car yet. You can see the front side, we still have weight on it. The rear, I have removed all of the weight off, and I've relocated the hoist arms underneath the lower control arms here just as safety. You know, you don't want to remove the hoist arms altogether. You want to make sure that if for whatever reason the post slips or post should fail or something, that, you know, you got a safety. It's like having a big jack stand underneath your car. So with that said, I am going to place up the subframe connectors. We'll see how things look. Might have to get the weight off the front and get these front hoist arms out of the way. We'll see. I think it was very close in this area. I just want to make sure that, you know, see how far, or if I can get away with having this hoist arm still on part of the frame rail, or if I'm going to have to move it and see, you know, maybe it'll be in this area with, I'll get a spacer in here, and that might be the way to go for the front. But let's take a look and see what we're working with. Once we tighten these down, you can see how it butts right up against the rear frame rail right there and follows pretty much that transmission mount and butts up against the frame rail there. It is a really nice piece in terms of the way that it's bent. So we'll clean up this metal so we got good weldable surface. Same thing up here, because I've recently painted all that. So get that all cleaned up. And I'm not gonna lie, guys, I'm gonna call Ricky over. Ricky is a much better welder than me, and we'll get him to knock that out real quick, and this car will be connected. All right, guys, so I've got all the areas ground down or sanded down that we will be placing weld on. And you know, you can follow the instructions. They tell you, you know, there's areas that are marked out, and it'll sort of be up to you in terms of what is going to be the best fit and how much welding and material do you want to add. In reality, some in the front, some in the back with the seat brace is, you know, more than adequate. Gonna go for another area on the back side of the front frame rail here, so it'll be tied in here, here, seat brace, and then along the back side here, and I'm gonna be happy with that. So we're gonna get washers so we can get these guys bolted up, and might have to also just consider having another jack available to put pressure on the bottom side of the subframe to help get everything butt up against the frame rails for welding purposes. The tighter you can get it, the better ultimately, but we'll see how well of a job just bolting it onto the lower section of the seat bolts does, and we'll go from there.
You have something, but it's getting out here on the subframe.
Oh, yeah. Everything's all welded up in here, cleaned up a few of the welds a little bit, and all we need to do now is I'll kind of take a Scotch pad and we'll spray some Seymour flat black and mask up and make sure all the welds are protected. And we already tightened all these up on the floor pan, so everything is pretty much good to go underneath here. Stiffler subframe connectors installed, Stiffler's crossmember brace, and this car is coming along quite nice. All right, guys, wheels are back on the car, front and rear. And I'm actually really happy with the amount of gap that's here with the car jacked up and the weight of the suspension off. That means that those drop shocks, those quad shocks, everything is doing what it should in terms of being low. So let's see what that's gonna look like when we put the car down. There's still work to do in the front, and it's not much. It's really just getting that electric power steering pump sorted out. I'm trying to wrap my brain around how to do the bracket up in the inner wheel well there, but let's see what this thing looks like on the ground. I'm actually really happy with this. In reality, guys, I think we could go to 285, 30 in the back, still clear the quad shocks, and still not need to roll the rear quarters. But this is definitely a safe height. I think this is actually a really nice stance, but yeah, might need to swap out those tires and get a 285 on back here. Front sits perfect. I'm happy with that. You can see, you know, it's not, we don't have poke. We don't have crazy stretch. I think, you know, we have a really nice line, side profile here of the way that these wheels fit. I guess it'll just come down to, yeah, if want to beef up the rear just a little bit more because we can, sort of like, why not, right? I'm gonna see if we can get a 285/30 in these Kumos and see if we can't stretch them into place. But you can see here, just have our quad shock clearance. I can get my fingers through there. So I get my fingers through there, we got room for 5 more millimeters. Same thing here. So there we go. The car is back down on the ground. Could roll it around and move it if we wanted to. Can't start it up because, well, I need to get that old E85 out of the fuel tank, and we need to get the power steering and everything sorted in the front side of the motor there. But otherwise, you have to take off the door panels again. I got to put in the doorman door lock actuators, because these ones, yeah, I've talked enough about that. I don't need to beat the dead horse. Need to get the rear seat installed in the back, and I need to clean up this dusty engine bay. But other than that, things coming along pretty good. So be sure to stay tuned, find out more what's happening with this twin turbo Coyote notch project. And guys, if you haven't signed up for my YouTube memberships, click that join button down below. If you want to interact one-on-one, you want to be within a small group of fellow enthusiasts, ask questions, get feedback, give me feedback. It is a private live session that I run, and sometimes the odd thing gets given away as well. But if not, your subscription is more than enough for me, so be sure to click that, hit like, share with your friends, all that other good stuff, and we'll see you here next time on the Infamous Project.